Hello, this is Dr. Fitzgerald. In this video, we want to discuss factoring trinomials using the X method. So let's get going. We want to factor a trinomial of the form and we have x squared plus bx plus c. And in this particular case, we will simply actually draw an x. And we will fill out our x. The top of our x will be the product of a times c. So ac. And our b term will just be written at the bottom. And we will need numbers that multiply to give us the a times c and will add to give us a b. So let's see exactly what we're talking about. So once again, they need to multiply to give us this, but add to give us the b term. So our first example, we want to factor x squared minus 7x plus 12 using this X method. When the leading coefficient is 1, so the first two examples we'll see, my leading coefficient will be 1. That is, there really is nothing there, but remember there's an imaginary 1 there. So when our leading coefficient is 1, when I draw my x, and I'll come over here and draw my x. When I draw my x, the number at the top, recall a times c, but my a is simply 1. So I'm just going to be left with 1 times 12, which is 12. So it's always just going to be this last number. That's when my leading coefficient is 1, that happens, because we have 1 times 12. And at the bottom, we're going to write a negative 7 because that's our middle term. So once again, a times c gives us a positive 12, and just bring down our middle term of 7. Now we need to think of two factors that multiply to give us 12, but add to give us a negative 7. So factors of 12 that add to give us a negative 7. Here we can see that our numbers will be a negative 3 and a negative 4. Why is that once again? Because negative 3 times a negative 4 gives me a 12, but negative 3 plus negative 4 gives me a negative 7. So that's the correct set of numbers or set of factors that we want. When that leading coefficient is 1, we're done. This implies that our factors are x minus 3 and x minus 4. So that would be the factorization for this. Let's look at another example. Let's factor x squared plus 3x minus 10. Let's come draw our x. So recall, because our leading coefficient is 1, our top number is 10. Because negative 1 times negative 10 gives us negative 10. Then we bring our b term down, and that's 3. So we need two numbers that multiply to give us a negative 10, but add to give us a positive 3. And those numbers should be 5 and a negative 2. So once again, we're automatically done. That implies that our factors are x plus 5, and it's plus because our 5 is positive, and then x minus 2. And that would be our final answer for that situation. Now let's actually look at what happens when our leading coefficient, notice in both of these cases, our leading coefficient was 1. Let's look at what happens when our leading coefficient is not 1. So how do we factor using this X method when this leading coefficient is not 1? Let's see. So let's erase this. And we'll look at 2 examples here, and then I think you guys should have it. And so the factorization, or the problem that we want to be able to factor in this problem, in this example, will be 2x squared plus x minus 15. So 2x squared plus x minus 15. So once again, we want to come over here and we want to draw our x. And recall, our top comes from multiplying a times c. So our 2 times a negative 15, and 2 times negative 15 gives us a negative 30. Lastly, the number that comes at the bottom represents our b term. And see that there's no coefficient, but remember there is an imaginary 1 there. So our b term that we drop down is a positive 1. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me 30, but add to give me 1. So once again, multiply to give me a negative 30, but add to give me 1. And those numbers will be a 5 and 6, but my 5 needs to be negative. So we have negative 5 and 6. Now, when our coefficient was 1, we were done. However, there's one additional step that we must follow. And here in this particular case, we actually want to go ahead and take this coefficient here, the 2. And I want to put that at the bottom. There. And literally, I like to say the 2 and just an x. So let's say 2x. And here I want to simplify these fractions. So let's look at that. And let's draw another x where they're simplified. Let's look at what happens when it's simplified. I have negative 30 and I have a 1. When I simplify this, well, you see that one's already simplified. So that really is 5 over 2x. That guy's simplified. However, 2 goes into 6 evenly 3 times. So this would be a 3 over x if I simplified that. Why? Because the 2 goes into 6 3 times. That's how I get that. And you don't necessarily have to rewrite this. You can write it off to the side, but let's just be really clear so that we see what's happening here. Now we're done. This is done. This is a matter of now sliding this term up here, and this guy implies that my factor is 2x minus 5. See, we just simply slid that 2x over. And then could you guess what this one will be? If I slide this guy over, this will just become x plus 3. We just move the x over, and it's plus 3 because my 3 is positive. So let's look at one other example of this. And in this case, the next case that we'll see, we have to remember a rule that we were always told that we should check first. So we want to remember that rule. So let's look at it. Let's look at the problem that we want to factor. In this case, our example that we want to factor is simply 2x squared plus 8x plus 6. And yes, I do want to fill out my x because we're using the x method. However, recall, we should always check for the greatest common factor first. And if there is a greatest common factor, we want to remove the greatest common factor. If we do not remove our greatest common factor, this method will fail. So we must always check for our GCF first. That's always rule number 1 when factoring. Check for GCF. So we see that we can take out a 2, or factor out a 2 from this problem. When factoring out a 2, we end up with x squared plus 4x plus 6. Oh, sorry, plus 3. Gotta make that correction. Plus 3. Now, we actually want to factor the inside part of the parentheses, which becomes a simple factorization. Why? Because now my leading coefficient is actually 1. So the number that goes at the top of my x is 3 because 1 times 3 is 3. The number that goes at the bottom is 4 because that's our middle term. And once again, I need two numbers that multiply to give me 3, but they add to give me 4. And that's pretty simple. Those two numbers will be 3 and 1. 3 and a positive 1. And since now my leading coefficient is 1, we're simply done. We just want to rewrite our 2. And then this one will imply that my factor is x plus 3. And my next factor is x plus 1. And that is factoring using the x method. Thank you.